Is curiosity the most underrated leadership skill? In a world of constant change, staying still is falling behind. On this episode of Business Growth Talks, best-selling author and operations expert Jon Bassford shares why curiosity isn't just a nice to have, it's a leadership superpower. Discover how questioning the status quo can unlock innovation, resolve hidden inefficiencies, and drive sustainable growth. Watch now to learn how curiosity can be the missing link in your business strategy.
I'm great.
Hey, Jon, how are you?
How are you doing?
Really good. Thank you so much for joining me today. So this is going to be a really interesting, this whole idea of curiosity, I think is super important. And it's something that I would say call myself a curious person. And I see that as a real strength. So we'll delve into that at a little bit later on the show. Brilliant. Thank you for joining me. The first question I ask all of my guests is, what does a business mindset
Business
mean to
mindset
you?
to me, it can mean a lot of different things, right? I would say a productive business mindset is one that is constantly trying to figure out the most effective and efficient way to run a business. That to me is what a business mindset is.
So effectiveness and finding inefficiencies is super important to you. Why don't we go a little bit into that, touch on that now, and we'll come back to it. But why for you is efficiencies the hidden
Yeah,
issue with a lot of
working with a lot
businesses?
of startups, small businesses, nonprofits, I just really see on a daily basis just how bogged down organizations get in how they run their business. A lot of times it's not their mission, it's not their product, it's not their service that gets in the way of growth and sustainability. It's the little things that happen. For example, I'm working with a fantastic new startup right now. They're in the AI space that's being combined with food science. And everyone in this entire organization touches everything every single day. I'm like, it is mind blowing. Like, an email goes out, an invoice comes in, 8 people see it, 8 people touch it. And yet,
Right.
despite that, there's still no set systems and process in who, where, and why, and where it goes. Right? There's just nothing behind it, and it just those little things that we take for granted, just who touches what, when, where, and why,
Mm.
really can bog down a business and get in the way of its growth.
So let's just park that for now because I think the inefficiencies, your operation background is super important, and I want to delve into that a lot more. But let me ask you another question on a different tact. Tell me one thing about your upbringing which impacts on who you are today.
I want to tie this back a little bit to the curious leader aspect, because when I just discovered curiosity as a superpower, it wasn't something that was on top of my mind. But as I looked back at my life and my childhood, high school, college, early career, curiosity has always been there. And I'm not really quite sure where that comes from. To some degree, I think it's always been a very innate thing for me to challenge the status quo, question things, question authority, look for better ways to improve things. It's really been a natural element for me. And again, as a kid, it portrayed itself as that kid who hung around the adults at family reunions and that sort of thing, and followed their conversations and asked questions and listened and learned, and at times pushed back and again kind of questioned things. So it's really been a very innate thing for me. And then move on forward to high school. I grew up in a conservative area of the country, of the United States, and really began to what I was being taught, why I believe those things. And again, you mentioned earlier that led to me being a philosophy major in undergrad, and on to law school. So I've kind of had this progression of a background that just entices questioning and allows questioning, right? And so it's been a through line throughout my entire life.
So, as a kid, as a young adult, were you pushing against authority?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say that's something that was, again, fairly innate with me. I think the background of that isn't about challenging authority per se, but challenging what authority is telling me. I think there's a slightly different nuance there of what it wasn't. I wasn't arguing for the sake of argument per se, but more thinking back to I'm being told X, Y, and Z. Why is that? What does that mean? What does it mean to me as a person, as an individual? And just really began to question things, right? And just began early on in my life thinking for myself, for lack of better words.
Mm. So that idea of challenging authority, questioning, probably comes from your philosophy background, but you did law and philosophy. So one is very much following the laws and what people are saying, and the other one is challenging it. What was that experience like for you, having such different like your major and minor? Just what was it like doing those subjects, and how has that impacted your
Sure.
the
So
rest of your
keep in
career?
mind, with a law education, most law schools are based upon the Socratic method, which is the constant questioning. You get to the answer of things by diving deeper into asking questions. And when a statement is made, well, why is that? Right? There's even in law school, although it's baked in laws and rules and written aspects, how you learn to think like a lawyer is about that constant questioning. So those really aren't in conflict at all. Obviously, when you come into practicing law, again, when you are making an argument in court or making an argument in a brief, you're challenging someone else's authority or stance on something. So that questioning is there throughout.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing. So, why, in your opinion, is curiosity
Yeah.
a
So
superpower?
how I define curiosity is an intentional and inquisitive act, looking beyond our own limitations and our current situations. As human beings, we are creatures of habit, creatures of comfort. Fear exists for a reason, to keep us safe from an evolutionary caveman type mentality. And so it's important that we break from those natural elements that, although they help keep us safe and help us go throughout the day without being overwhelmed with thought and other aspects. But when it comes to innovation, growth, and change, they're absolutely the enemy. And so, if you want to break free from that, you got to have curiosity. You got to look beyond.
So, John, why is curiosity such a superpower?
Yeah, as humans, for one, organizations are run by humans, and humans innately are creatures of habit, creatures of comfort. These actually exist for very important reasons. And although they help us get through the day, even fear, right? Fear exists for a reason, it keeps us safe. But when it comes to innovation, growth, and change, these are actually all the enemy. And so we got to find ways to break free from the comfort, from the habits, from the fear, and break free from that, and explore our opportunities. And so that's curiosity, to me, is the way to break through from our own limitations and our current situations.
But it makes me feel that, like, you're talking about like social norms, business norms, the way that things have been done for the last 10, 20, 50, 100 years. What's wrong with that whole idea of creating norms? Why should we be challenging them with curiosity?
Sure. So the world is ever changing, right? Things are changing around us constantly. The old adage, the only constant is change. And if we stay doing the same things over and over again, we will eventually stop being successful. Look at companies like Blockbuster,
Mm,
behemoth of its time, right? It actually even had an opportunity to buy Netflix for like $50 million.
yeah.
Uh, when Netflix was struggling, startup company, they just didn't see the value. They were unwilling, not just unable, they were unwilling to see that the landscape was changing, and this brick and mortar way of going every Friday night with your family and picking out two DVDs was going to go away. And Netflix saw something changing, and they're adapting to the customs, adapting to new customs, people not going into a store, people having things delivered, and then eventually obviously going into more digital, viewing things. But if we are not finding ways to continually adapt and change, just like people, our organizations are going to perish.
Yeah, we'll explore this a little bit later, but I just want to ask you about your audit that you do, the audit process that you do for your clients. Why don't you tell me about how you structure that and how you help your clients that way?
Yeah. So again, going off the concept that our organizations are run by individuals. Again, we're creatures of habit and comfort and that sort of thing. We get trapped into doing things the same way. And you don't create those mechanisms to challenge what we're doing and analyze those things. We're going to keep repeating the same patterns. So, what our audit does is come into an organization and we're looking at four things. We're looking at your decision making framework, making sure that the leadership of your organization is aligned in how they're making decisions, because there's no bigger way to get bogged down, to have delays, have costly delays, is than not having a decision making process aligned. So we're looking at that. We're looking at the culture. We're looking at, can the culture of the organization adapt and change? Then we're going deep into the operations and looking at the strength and maturity of the operations. We're looking at 47 different areas, from your accounting practices to your HR practices to your market position, everything in your organization, and analyzing that. And the goal is to not be aspirational, but truly look at where the organization is in that moment so that you can fix the things that are holding you back. And lastly, we're looking at the efficiency and compliance side of your internal operations, your accounting, finance, HR, those sort of things.
So something you mentioned there was about having leadership aligned to the audit and potentially changing aspects of the business. Sometimes that can be the hardest, although they might instigate, they might get you in. Actually, then you challenging their way of practicing, their way of doing things. Can you give me an example of someone that was challenging from the leadership side that actually have then seen value in what you've done and made that change in their business?
Yeah, so we work with someone who at least has a growth mindset or wants to have a growth mindset. I come across people all the time who, business owners, a lot of times it tends to be that family business that's passed down a little bit. But I hear the phrase, we've been running our business for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, 50 years, whatever it is, and we're just fine with how it's going. Those are not my ideal clients. I'm looking for the individuals who are either they recognize they don't know what they don't know. They want to go to the next level, want to make sure they have the right foundation, right? Those are kind of the two mindsets that I'm working with. And for a great example of working with a CEO who thought he had a growth mindset, he had this saying of asking the staff, why aren't we Amazon? They were founded the same year as Amazon, and he wanted to be Amazon. Completely different industry. No way it could actually be Amazon, but just the growth and innovation side of Amazon, right? But I started analyzing the operations of the organization and looking at a competitor that was rising up in their industry. And I said, hey, look, you guys are really missing a mark here. There's your competitor that's rising up is focused on video content. You guys aren't. And the demographics you're trying to reach, video content is king. And his response was, that's not how I envisioned this organization delivering content when I found the organization. And so I'm dumbfounded. I'm like, so before YouTube, before Instagram, before TikTok, you didn't envision video being a main delivery of content for your organization. And therein lies why he wasn't Amazon, is because he was unwilling to break away from how he visioned this organization nearly 30 years prior to this moment. And he got stuck in the moment. And that really was the key for me, that I had brought about too much change for him. I don't actually think it was about the video content. I think he had reached his threshold of change. And when that happens, I really have to pull back and soften things a little bit in order to allow that leader to push through themselves. I can only lead people to change so much. They have to be willing to take the steps. And it's a great question, because it's the mindset of the CEO and their willingness to accept change is absolutely one of the hardest things that I have to deal with in my position.
What's more harder for you to deal with, cultural change or operational like numbers that you can back it up with? What's harder for you to work with?
Yeah, definitely the culture change. It is harder in the sense that you really have to lead people to it. It is a culture change is a communication driven component. You got to lead them to it. You got to lead them through it. You got to lead them beyond it. You really have to work on the soft skills of change management for a cultural shift where the operational aspects are much more hard facts. Are there times where you're challenging what someone does and how they do it? And can there be some ego attached to things? Yes. But for the most part, there's a clear line of showing if we make this change, we're going to get back 5 hours a week. We're going to save some money. There's hard facts behind it, where the cultural change is much more of a softer component and requires a lot more massaging and nuance.
How much are you pushing people into the light or pulling people towards the destination?
Yeah, for the most part, the CEOs and founders and leaders that we work with, they are ready. So they tend to be stepping that direction. So we don't have to pull so much. We do at times have to help them get out of their own way. Again, when the fear sets in, habit, comforts, they start getting challenged. There can be a certain pushback. But the key is that we are not pushing for change for the sake of change. We are looking for things to change to help you fill the gaps, the holes existing in your business, existing organization, so that you can grow and change.
What size companies? You said your ideal client being growth company or growth mindset leaders, but what size companies are your perfect pitch point?
Yeah, so we tend to work in probably the $5 to $50 million range. We obviously have worked smaller, we've worked bigger, but that's our sweet spot is in that small business that's looking to double the revenue, triple the revenue, take things to the next level. That's our ideal client.
And are these businesses often plateaued for a reason? Their growth has plateaued.
Yeah, so I think two things, right? I think one, or actually probably three situations. One is there are startups that have been just doing things ad hoc, right? If they don't have systems, they don't have structures, we can come in and create that for them. Again, like the client I mentioned that's in the AI and food space right now, that's really what I'm focused on with them right now. But there are the plateau individuals, and there's the companies that are continually going up. They're on an upward trajectory, but a fear sets in, or at least a curiosity sets in of, do we have everything as locked down and tight as we think we should? Because if you don't have the foundation, the operational foundation set, a lot of times what happens is companies will continue to grow, they will hit a plateau, or they'll actually even start reversing because the systems and processes they have in place can't sustain that growth. And so they want to make sure that they have that right foundation set.
Yeah. What's your marketing strategies? How do you find your clients?
Yeah, one of the things, a big thing I'm into right now, obviously, is content. Doing podcasts. The book has been a big help. The TEDx release. Luckily, with some of those things I'm doing right now, it's allowed people to come to us, hearing what we're doing and come to us. But we do have advertisements that are out. We do LinkedIn, email marketing. We have a multi-channel approach to how we're looking at this.
Amazing. What's the plans and goals for the next 2 to 5 years for your business?
Sure. A couple things. Obviously, continue growing the consulting side. My goal really is to help as many individual and organizations grow as possible. So one side of that is obviously the consulting, the audit side, as well as the fractional consulting and advising that we do to help our clients implement the growth plan that comes out of the audit, but also really looking at increasing my speaking and my workshop that I do for around curiosity and helping create curious leadership. Two new things I'm hoping to get off the ground this year, or I think we will get off the ground this year, is a curious leader assessment and a curious culture assessment. Those are two things that I want to have up and running. I think they can be very valuable in helping organizations assess their leadership, assess their culture, to really make those steps towards creating curious leadership and curious culture.
And so you said you have a consulting side, which is part of the audit, and then a fractional side of the business. So do you deploy people as fractional COOs into businesses?
Yeah, so when I first started Lateral Solutions, that's predominantly what it was. I launched operations for some startups, for profit and nonprofit, and stayed on as a fractional COO, but that was far more tactical, right? I was the in-house COO just in a fractional basis. What we are doing with the audit is when you come out of the audit, we're going to create a 12-month growth plan for you that's going to help you give you the direction that you need to fix the things or to enhance the things that come out of the audit. And then we will place experienced fractional COO in your business to really kind of help coach, advise, quarterback to make sure that you're making the most out of that 12-month growth plan. We have people, everyone's come from some kind of growth industry, private equity, startups, founders, people who have had hands-on experience helping businesses and organizations grow.
And you mentioned a few times about working with startups, non-profits. How do you adapt the way that you're working when you're dealing with startups, founders, or established businesses?
Yeah, so for the most part, it's fairly similar. If you take out the tax component, which we're not CPAs, we don't do taxes. If you take out the tax component, most associations, nonprofits, for the most part, they run very similar businesses. Your accounting, your HR, marketing, it all works the same. You have a different angle, you have a different mentality behind it somewhat. But going into an organization and assessing what is working and not working is really the same across all three. There's not a whole lot of difference. And so we're able to come into working in a very industry agnostic type of way to help organizations grow.
And the role of innovation. So this is the hardest element in my view, is innovating within businesses. Not necessarily challenging the culture and how things are being run, but actually being able to innovate, to be able to grow your business, I think is one of the hardest aspects of business. Hiring is, in my mind, hiring is the hardest thing. And maybe we can touch on hiring, but that whole idea of innovation is really tough, not just culturally, but equally thinking about how you innovate to make the next step. So you gave the example of Blockbuster earlier. So they just didn't innovate at all. They didn't see what was coming in the future. You've got, I think it was Kodak that didn't look for digital cameras as well. So how do you help people innovate, and where do the ideas come from? Are they being generated by the business owner, by the leader or the team, or are they being instigated by you and your team?
Sure. Real quick on innovation. I think sometimes we get caught up in seeing innovation as Steve Jobs, as the machines in Amazon that autonomously are moving around products with no person driving machine. But again, innovation could just be changing what we're doing. In my book and part of the audit process is we're looking at operational excellence, which I define as the ability for an organization to achieve its intended results as efficiently and effectively as possible. To me, that's what innovation is, right? Getting to the end goal as quickly and efficiently as possible and effectively as possible. And again, looking back at my earlier example about the organization, Why Aren't We Amazon? Innovation for them was adopting going from written content, static written content to video content, right? That was one way they could have innovated. My first organization my very first job, I really helped change that organization, help some growth because I took a guide, a 2-page guide that was buried in the back of a manual and brought it out front in everything I did in communicating to this organization and to the people in it was referencing this guide. And we saw a 25% increase in revenue, a 500% increase in programming in 4 to 5 years, all because I brought this document out and brought it to the forefront and had the basis of my communication. So innovation doesn't have to be this big capital expenditure, et cetera, but it's really more about how do we look at what we're doing, how we're doing, and why we're doing it, and affecting change to improve the way we're operating, delivering our products, delivering our services, whatever it may be.
Couldn't agree more. And when the word innovate is used, we do think of technology innovation, but actually a slight twist of their marketing strategy, their slight twist of how the makeup of their sales team or the people you're employing in the sales team. Or one of my biggest bugbears is when you've got these bigger, like established businesses, and marketing's on that side, is over here on the right, and then sales is on the left, and they never shall meet. That's one of the things. I was just talking to a marketeer earlier on today, and she was again reiterating this point to me, saying, like, that there's no reason from a marketer and a sales perspective that they're not talking every day. So is that the kind of innovation that you're looking for to help these companies grow?
Yeah, and I realize I didn't answer your last question either, which is where does the innovation come from? Ideally, our goal is to have it come from everybody, right? We're going to help be a catalyst for innovation and growth through our audit, through our process, helping people understand what a curious culture is. But the goal is, yeah, you want it driven by the top. You want the leadership bought into innovation, but you want to bring the people along. Creating a curious culture is all about, as you mentioned, breaking down the silos, breaking down the hierarchical structure that used to exist in businesses to truly allow ideas, feedback to flow from every direction in all ways. We are no longer working on manufacturing lines where we are building one part 100 times a day. And we are doing that regardless of what everyone else is doing around us. We are now connected organizations. Accounting has an insight into how marketing is working. Marketing has a look into how accounting is looking. Everyone has a unique perspective into how the organization is running. And by tapping into all of those different perspectives is what's truly going to allow you to, again, create that operational excellence of achieving the intended results as quickly and effectively as possible.
And tell us about your books. So your first book, The Curious Leader, and then your new book. Why don't you tell me about Curious Leader first of all?
Yeah, it's fantastic writing that book, right? Because when you're forced to sit down and think about, what you've been doing, how you've been doing it, you even create some more structures around things. The whole concept of defining operational excellence came out when I was writing the book. It's something I've done throughout my career and move all my clients towards, but it required me to sit down and analyze even what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, how I'm portraying that to my clients. So writing the book was an amazing experience. If any of your listeners want to get a free PDF of the first chapter, in the US, you can text the word chapter to 33777, and we'll send you a free PDF of the first chapter. But it keeps selling. It was an amazing experience to write. And I've had a number of people reach out to me, want me to come in and talk to their organizations, either the keynote style or workshop style, to truly help bring about curiosity. One recent person said their company just recently adopted curiosity as a core value of the company. I'm like, man, that's a great mission. That's something I want to start spreading, is creating that movement of putting curiosity in that list of core values that companies, organizations should be adopting.
And what about The Co-Parenting Secret, which is a bit more of a personal book and personal perspective?
Yeah, I'm hoping that's going to be released midsummer 2025 here. But I actually started writing that book prior to The Curious Leader, and The Curious Leader just ended up writing itself a little more. But the concept behind the co-parenting book was I kept having friends and family, when finding out that I'd gotten divorced, asking me how parenting was with my ex-wife, my son's mom. I said, it's absolutely fantastic. We could write a book on co-parenting. And so at a certain point, about a year and a half ago, I was like, it's time to stop talking about writing this book and actually doing it. And this really, again, we're talking about challenging the status quo and questioning things. It really is challenging that traditional way of co-parenting. I'm a product of a divorced family from the 80s, where we follow the typical setup where we lived with mom was the parent that took care of sick days and homework and all the things that life throws at you. And dad was an every other weekend fun dad, right? Where you got to go to the movies and eat out and do all the fun stuff. And mom was left really raising the kids. And of course, that's not a slight on my dad. It just really was the nature of how things operated back then. But really flipping that on its head, because today, both parents, even in a two home situation, are co-parenting a lot more. It's time that we start rethinking how that works, what it looks like. And the key, kind of the foundation of the book, is that if we realize that it's not about you, me as an individual, me as the dad, the mom as the mom, it's not about you. First and foremost, it's about the kids. If we keep the focus on the kids, we will parent a lot better. We'll let go of co-parenting. Shouldn't be about settling old scores and getting even and constant fighting. It's about what's best for the kids first and foremost. And then secondly, it's what's best for the nucleus, what's best for the entire group, that's the community that's raising this kid. And when you keep that focus, the parenting and how we're raising our kids align so much better.
Thank you. Thank you for your honesty and openness about that. How do you think you've evolved as a leader?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I've really learned, I think, is letting go a little bit. I came into my career and my coming out of law school, guns blazing, ready to prove myself, and constantly in that motive of making things happen. And when you're in that mode where you're trying to control everything, you're trying to make things happen, you're trying to rise up the ladder, you push a lot. And looking back at my career, certainly if because of my ambitions and constant pushing, I actually hindered my career somewhat. And so I've learned to let go, right? Like we can do the things that we need to do on a daily basis, weekly, monthly basis. But at the end of the day, we cannot control the results. We got to do the work and let the results happen. So one of the big things just from a personal growth side that's gone into my business is letting go of control and just realizing that we got to do the work and let the results happen.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you describe your risk appetite as?
I would say it's pretty risky, both from a business standpoint, personal side, investment type thing. It's weird. Like I have a dichotomy in my life where I'm very much a change maker, a risk taker. At the same time, there are elements of my life I am completely habitual. Food is one of them. I don't want to think about what to cook, how to cook, when to cook. And so I have the same meal twice a day, 7 days a week for the most part. There's
What do you
obviously
eat?
so it chicken, rice, and broccoli is. I'm a weightlifter, so the protein, the clean carbs, but it's just food is one of those areas that like I don't want to think about. I don't want to spend my time cooking. I don't want to spend my time cleaning. And so everything I do is about minimalistic stuff. How can I create a meal that has the nutrition that I need? No cooking, light cleanup, and I use the same spoon, the same bowl. I wash them real time, put them in the dish drainer. At dinner, I'm bringing it back out using the same one again. So there's aspects of my life that I keep in a tight container because that's not an area where I want to spend my time thinking about it so that I can spend my time on being a risk taker and growing and learning in these other areas.
What do your kids eat when they come round to yours?
So my son were actually, yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because I don't cook. My wife is pescatarian, so she doesn't eat meat, land meat. So it's interesting, right? Because we don't have that traditional. Okay, it's 6 o'clock, 6:30. Let's all sit down and eat one meal together as a family. We all eat separate. So my son's eating habits are changing right now because he was a creature of habit as well, one of the same things over and over again. But now he's wanting some more variety, wanting things that are prepared and cooked for him, that sort of stuff. So we're actually in a transition right now to make sure that we are getting him the nutrition that he needs, as well as addressing his expanding appetite for different foods.
Yeah, amazing. What would you say the biggest challenges that you've faced in your life, not just your career, in your life?
Hmm. Let's see. Wow, that's a good one. Throughout my career, again, I would say not a lot of challenges. Things have really kind of continued to move forward for me. For me, I actually I'll get real personal on this one. 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I really wanted to take my consulting to the next level. I think I was about a year into consulting and wanted to take that to the next level. And so I started working with a professional personal development coach, executive coach, if you will, and with the goal of let's figure out how to grow my business. And to be quite honest with you, like I think I worked with him for about a year and a half, and what I paid him for a year was 25% of the revenue I was bringing in. It was a big investment for me, but again, kind of go back to risk taking. I'm willing to gamble on myself and make those type of investments. And so we started working together. And again, here I am thinking, all right, this guy's going to give me the secret sauce, the tools I need to grow my business. And what we ended up working on was me. So much of our success in business and in life is not about the external stuff, but the internal stuff. And despite having a law degree, having an MBA, having the highest certification in my industry, and running a $8 million organization at the age of 36, et cetera, really accomplished a decent amount of things in my life and my career. At the same time, there was a lot of times I felt like a fraud. I felt that I wasn't worthy, that was a failure. And actually, when I got into the consulting world and started making some more money, and then started being a part of some masterminds and involving myself around other entrepreneurs, here I am. I'm 40 years old and I'm making X number of dollars. And here is a 32-year-old making 10 times what I'm making. And people always say, if you're in a group you become the sixth of whatever you're in. So if you have 5 people who are
Yeah.
alcoholics, you become the sixth. If you're 5 millionaires, you become the sixth. The problem with surrounding yourself with these ultra successful people sometimes is if you don't have the right view of yourself, it becomes even a bigger drain on you and creates that self-doubt and limitation because you're not there. And again, I fell into the trap of pushing. So when I felt like I was behind where I should be, I wanted to grow, I wanted to increase my wealth, etc. I started pushing. And so what we ended up working on more than anything was more that kind of spiritual mindfulness aspects. And what changed my life was I read a book called, at the recommendation of someone he had on his podcast, the coach's podcast, Soul Without Shame. The Soul Without Shame. And that book is all about understanding the superego, why it exists from a neurological standpoint, evolutionary standpoint, all of those type of things, in addressing that, yes, I can be a confident, assertive, successful individual and still have self-doubt. Those are not mutually exclusive. And understanding why that self-doubt comes in, why those limiting beliefs come in, and really beginning to tackle that and reducing their effect on me as a person and on my success, and also limiting how often it comes up. So that's one of the biggest things through my life that I had to really learn. I have the most amazing mom who raised us, but she never believed in herself, never smart enough, never pretty enough, never successful enough, all those type of things. I think that kind of negative environment really kind of affected us growing up and created this self-doubt mentality. So it took a lot of hard work for me. I meditate daily, I read daily on mindfulness type topics, but really working through that and getting rid of those limiting beliefs has been a struggle and also reward, probably the biggest struggle and reward in my life.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all my guests. They're quick-fire questions. They don't need a quick-fire answer. The first question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
Going out on my own from a W-2 world to consulting and being my own boss has been amazing for me. I think it fits who I am and what I'm trying to do to help other organizations grow. And it's been a great move for me.
Great. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Just try, just start, right? Whatever it is that you want to do or thinking about, writing a book, doing a TEDx talk, starting a company, launching a product, whatever it is, just start. It is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be the right time. You just got to start.
So there's a book that, and one of the great sayings that I like is start now, get perfect later. It's
100%.
such a true word, because if you don't, you'll just procrastinate or agonize over one thing that might not be perfect, but just getting going is definitely the way forward. Next question. Who's the person that's helped you most in your career?
Yeah, so I've had people along the way. Obviously, the executive coach that I worked with that kind of helped me kind of discover some of these elements and work through them and grow in that way has been instrumental. But also my very first boss. My very first boss working for the organization, had been there for 6 years, but he really allowed me to explore, be curious, and take on different roles. And my first role was not on the internal operations side of the house, but I started taking on those roles. And when I was leaving that organization because I wanted to take my career to a different level, that foundation of him allowing me to play in different spaces and different departments within the organization allowed me to take on that operational role when I was ready to take that on.
Right. Tell me about a regret that you have.
Yeah. So one boss that I worked with, so actually I'd say there's 2 different bosses. I mentioned earlier about the pushing, right? The pushing. And I think there are 2 times in my career where I pushed too much, whether it's one organization I just ended up leaving voluntarily, but I think that kind of hurt the relationship I had with that boss because of some mentalities I had with pushing. And again, I was doing it from a positive place. I wanted change, I wanted growth, I wanted that sort of thing. But to a certain point, you got to know your lane and your role. And secondly, in a COO role that I had, again, I brought about change a little too much for a CEO. And I wish I would have managed that situation, managed up a little better, helping him get through some of his discomfort around the change and slow down the pace of it a little bit more to be able to help him longer.
Thank you. What are you most proud of?
Trying. Again, it's tough to pinpoint one particular thing that I'm most proud of, but I'll tell a quick story here about when I was getting ready to launch my book. Again, fear sets in, right? Like imposter syndrome sets in. Is this going to flop? Is this going to make a difference? Did I do the wrong thing here? And my wife actually is the one who reminded me, like, John, I have a lot of very successful friends. They're doing great things in their career. Not a single one is has written a book, let alone trying to write a book. Not a single one is doing a TEDx talk. Like the fact that you are doing this is the success. Really kind of living in that and reminding myself that I keep trying, I keep moving forward, I keep pushing the envelope for myself, and what I'm trying to do and influence is the thing I'm most proud of.
Amazing. Tell me something about you that most people don't know.
Sure. So the line I always give about that is I am a powerlifting hockey player who loves Broadway musicals. And I showcase that a lot to just talk about, again, I'm a jack of all trades, right? When it comes to professional, I oversee marketing and legal and accounting and HR and culture and all these aspects. And I think that kind of also highlights the diversity of me as an individual, that, typically musicals and Broadway is not something you would see from a guy born and raised in the Midwest and bigger guy, that sort of thing. But my wife and I, we're on track right now to, by the end of July, we'll see 9 shows between here in DC and New York. And so it's a big passion of mine.
What was the last one you saw?
What is the last one we saw? The last one that we saw was And Juliet. It's a kind of a remake, a little bit of a spoof on Romeo and Juliet.
Okay, interesting. What does legacy mean to you?
Legacy to me is having our actions, our words, our efforts live beyond us. And that's actually something that came up. I was doing a keynote for a national organization for their volunteer leadership. And was trying to define legacy for this group. And I couldn't really find one dictionary wise that fit what I was trying to describe. And so that's what I came up with, as having our actions and our efforts and our words live beyond the current moment and continue to have an impact.
Amazing. And lastly, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you or find out more about your business?
Yep. So the 2 best ways are to go to my consulting page website, which is think-lateral.com, or you can go to my personal brand site, which is Jon Bassford, like a bass fish in a Ford car.com. And those are the 2 best ways to reach me.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. If today's conversation has sparked new ideas about leadership, innovation, and operational growth, don't miss out on what happens behind the scenes. Sign up for my free email newsletter from www.businessgrowthtalks and sign up where you'll get insights, bonus takeaways, and what's coming up on the next episodes. And if you're serious about taking your business to the next level, watch this video where we break down the practical strategies to unlock real business growth step by step.